Hey guys, thanks for joining us today as we review the 2012 sci-fi looper starring Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Bruce Willis, and Emily Blunt, Paul Dano, and Noah Segan. In this science fiction action-packed thriller written and directed by Rian Johnson, our narrator is a young man named Joe from the year 2044. He tells us about his modern society, which is somewhat dystopian. Joe, played by Joseph Gordon-Levitt, tells us he lives life on the edge in his profession as a looper. He explains their primary job is to kill and incinerate the bodies of people who are zapped from the future back to the past he lives in. Joe and the other loopers work for the syndicate run by Abe. Abe is played by Jeff Daniels, and each looper have a designated area they must show up to at an appointed time to terminate these targets. The targets' faces are covered, and the loopers are not allowed to ask questions of any kind or to remove the facial coverings. Payment comes after the execution is complete in the form of silver bars that happen to be attached to the backs of their targets. Some of the victims sent to loopers to be executed may be their older selves. These are identified by gold bars instead of silver.
Still alive 30 years from now. They'll find our older self, zap him back to us, and we'll kill him like any other job.
Which means they have closed their own loop which conceals any traces of their relationships to the syndicate. This is the loop. The syndicate does this because in the year 2074 they cannot dispose of bodies secretly, so they send their former workers back in time to be eliminated by loopers. Joe's life is a bit challenging with a girlfriend who never has time for him, friends with TK or telekinetic abilities, and he takes drug shots in his eyes to cure his boredom. One day, his co-worker, Seth, played by Paul Dano, lands in serious trouble with Abe and heads to Joe's house. Seth explains to Joe that his loop was being closed, seeing his older self as his target, and he could not kill him. Instead, he let him run. In a panic, he flees to Joe's house instead of telling Abe that his older self ran, and Abe found out. He begs Joe to hide him, and after some convincing, Joe agrees and hides Seth. But it's too late. Abe has an elite unit dispatched called the Gatmen. Arrive, and Kid Blue, played by Noah Segan, leads the group convincing Joe to release Seth. The Gatmen take Seth and have Joe see Abe, who makes it clear he is not having any issues like this again with people who work for him. Joe understands feeling bad for Seth, but leaves while Seth and old Seth are both killed. Soon after, we see Joe close his loop by killing old Joe and moving throughout the later years of his life in Shanghai. He spends all his money and time on drugs and partying, then goes broke. Now a hitman. Joe meets a loving woman played by Shu Qing. They marry, and he lives out his remaining years with her until three men show up to their home one quiet morning and kill Joe's wife. Overpowering his captors, old Joe sends himself back to 2044, altering his history by evading Joe and escaping. This pits Abe and the Gatmen against young Joe while old Joe experiences vague memories of young Joe's actions in the present. Young Joe writes a familiar name into his arm with a knife that appears on old Joe's arm, signaling for them to meet. This leads old Joe to a diner where he meets young Joe. Old Joe explains to young Joe what happened with his wife and who the Rainmaker is. The Rainmaker saw his mother killed as a child, took over 5 cities, and started closing loops working against loopers.
This is a piece of identifying information on the Rainmaker. He's here. He lives here, now, in this county. And I'm gonna use this to find him. And I'm gonna kill him.
Young Joe does recall hearing about him from Seth but doesn't care. The Gatmen show up and start firing at old Joe. Now trying to escape, he grabs young Joe and they fall, exposing the map. Old Joe retrieved from a local library to locate the Rainmaker. Young Joe gets a piece of the map and old Joe is on the run again. Young Joe is too, because the Gatmen think he's working against them. Later, young Joe makes his way to a quaint, quiet place where a woman named Sarah, played by Emily Blunt, and her son Sid, played by Pierce Gagnon, live away from the city in a farm setting. Their connection creates its own loop, and they each are drawn closer to one another. While young Joe is making his connections with the mother and son pair, we see an older broken Joe going to two other children's homes after losing the portion of the map young Joe has. Not sure if either of them is the Rainmaker. Young Joe is still learning about Sarah, and Sid, learning Sid, is quiet but likes him. They connect, and he and Sarah become closer, but a looper shows up at Sarah's house looking for young Joe. Joe and Sid hide while she talks to looper Jesse. She lets him inspect the house, and he verifies Joe is not there, so he leaves. Joe and Sid go back to the house, and Jesse pops back up. Jesse becomes aggressive, and Sid begins to get very, very mad. He starts to yell while Sarah takes hold of Joe and runs out of the house with him. Sid's anger causes Jesse's body to fully explode. Now, Sarah explains that Sid has a very strong set of telekinetic abilities because she and his father both had TK abilities when they had him. When Sid gets mad, Sarah must hide in a metal safe until he calms down.
Mom, you're a liar! You're going to get killed because you won't stop lying!
Sid, calm down.
Joe has now realized that Sid is the Rainmaker, and his older self will be coming to kill Sid. Older Joe ends up killing all of the Gatmen except Kid Blue, and kills Abe in the Syndicate. Young Joe kills Kid Blue, and old Joe catches up with Sarah and Sid. Sid gets very mad again, but his Sarah calms him down and protects him while telling him to run away. Young Joe sees all of this at a distance, but for a second sees into the future and sees Sarah killed by old Joe, Seed, on the run as a child alone, and old Joe without his wife, and says this is just a constant loop. So young Joe unalives himself. Old Joe disappears, and Sarah and Sid are safe. Now Sarah can teach Sid how to control his TK abilities. This was one of the best films I've seen Joseph Gordon-Levitt in. I feel his acting with Bruce Willis and Emily Blunt were amazing. An incredible amount of chemistry between these actors. Pierce Gagnon did an amazing job capturing the pain and torment of a child with an ability so strong he had no control over. That ended up killing his aunt, Sarah's sister. I feel Looper did describe what the Loopers were doing, but the second meaning was a continuous cycle of death and violence that caused children and innocent people to perish. But the human element really takes its place in this film. Young Joe was that guy, caring for his best friend Seth, trying to help him, caring about what happened to Sid and Sarah, trying to do the right thing by closing his loop. But the nice guy finishes last, as they say, and he gave himself to stop a horrible cycle. The direction was perfect, catching the beauty of Saigon, farm life, and the plot was filled with twists and great timing on flashbacks. I think this movie flowed great, and could have a sequel if writer-director Rian Johnson cares to share that with us. Yeah, never know. Young Joe and Sarah could have had a child. This movie is actually number 2 on my top 10 all-time favorite movies. But please let me know in the comments if you've seen Looper and what you thought about it. Tell me who the best actor was, and if you'd like to see a sequel. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks so much for watching. See you next movie.